The night air was cool and crisp as Michelle walked down the quiet streets of downtown Atlanta. Street lamps cast long shadows on the sidewalk as she made her way home after another exhausting shift at Central Hospital. Being a medical resident meant long hours, but she loved every minute of helping people heal. Her mom had always told her that healing others was her gift, and now here she was, living that dream. The clock had just struck 11:30 p.m. when she heard footsteps behind her. At first, she didn't think much of it. This was a busy city after all. But then came the sound of a vehicle slowly cruising alongside her, its engine purring quietly. Before she could react, a white van screeched to a halt right next to her. Everything happened so fast after that. 3 men jumped out, wearing dark clothes and masks. Michelle tried to run, but they caught her quickly. She kicked and screamed, fighting with all her strength. Her hospital badge went flying, landing in some nearby bushes, though her attackers didn't notice. They were too busy trying to control her as she fought back fiercely. One of them cursed as she landed a solid kick to his shin. "Shut her up," growled their leader, a tall man with cold blue eyes visible through his mask. His voice dripped with hate as he spat out words that made Michelle's blood run cold. They were targeting her because of her skin color. These weren't just random criminals, but a gang known for their racist attacks in the area. What they didn't know was that Michelle wasn't just any doctor. Her father wasn't just any military man. He was Captain Thomas Anderson, one of the most respected Special Forces officers in the country. Right now, he was probably sitting in his study, wondering why his daughter hadn't called to let him know she'd made it home safely, their nightly routine whenever she worked late shifts. The gang forced her into the van, but Michelle stayed alert despite her fear. She noticed things: the smell of cigarettes and pine air freshener, the rusty spot on the van's floor, the way the leader favored his right leg when he moved. Her medical training had taught her to be observant, and now she was putting those skills to use in a way she never expected. They drove for what felt like hours, taking turns that seemed random, but Michelle knew better. She was counting them silently: left, right, left, straight for about 10 minutes, then right again. Every detail could matter later. The leader, who the others called Ray, kept making phone calls, talking about sending a message and teaching them their place. What these men didn't realize was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They saw Michelle as an easy target, a young black woman walking alone at night. They never stopped to think about who she might be, about her father's military connections, about her own strength and intelligence. They never imagined that this single act would lead to their entire network crumbling down. The van finally stopped somewhere that sounded remote, no traffic noise, just crickets and the occasional distant dog bark. As they pulled her out roughly, Michelle caught a glimpse of what looked like an old warehouse. She memorized everything she could: the broken window on the second floor, the faded blue paint, the rusty chain-link fence. Through it all, Michelle kept her composure. Years of handling emergency room crises had taught her to stay calm under pressure. She knew that showing fear wouldn't help her situation. Instead, she focused on gathering information, staying aware, and waiting for the right moment. Her father had always taught her that knowledge was power, and right now, knowledge might be her best weapon. But Captain Anderson wasn't just sitting idle. The moment Michelle missed their nightly check-in call, he knew something was wrong. His daughter was reliable. She never missed their calls. As the gang was driving her to their hideout, they had no idea that one of the military's most skilled officers was already setting things in motion. They didn't know that their simple act of hate was about to bring down an entire network of corruption and violence. The leader pushed Michelle into a small room, thinking he had all the power. But even as the door slammed shut, she was already planning, observing, thinking. She wasn't just a victim, she was a survivor, and more importantly, she was Captain Anderson's daughter. These men had no idea what they had just started, or how their act of hate would lead to their own downfall. Captain Anderson sat in his study, staring at his phone. The clock showed 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes past his daughter's usual check-in time. Some might call him overprotective, but after 25 years in Special Forces, he knew how quickly things could go wrong. Michelle had never missed their nightly call, not even during her busiest hospital shifts. He tried her number again, listening to the endless ringing. Each unanswered call made his heart beat faster. At midnight, he called the hospital. "No, Dr. Anderson left about an hour ago, the night nurse told him. She finished her shift on time today. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones, the same instinct that had kept him alive through countless missions. Without wasting another minute, he grabbed his keys and headed for the hospital. The night security guard recognized him from Michelle's family photos and let him review the security footage right away. What he saw made his blood run cold. The grainy video showed everything: the white van, the masked men, his daughter fighting back with everything she had. He watched her hospital badge fall into the bushes, a detail the kidnappers had missed in their hurry. His military training kicked in as he noted every detail: the van's dented rear bumper, the distinctive way one attacker moved, the partial license plate visible in one frame. The local police arrived quickly. They knew who Captain Anderson was, and a kidnapping called for immediate action. But as they started taking notes, the captain was already making his own calls. 25 years in Special Forces meant he had contacts everywhere, people who owed him favors, people who could move faster than official channels. "Sir," one of his old team members answered on the first ring. "What do you need?" Within minutes, a network of former military personnel was mobilizing. They knew the streets, they knew the criminal underworld, and most importantly, they knew how these hate groups operated. The police detective assigned to the case, Detective Chen, was sharp. She'd been tracking this gang for months, building a case piece by piece. "They've done this before," she explained, spreading photos across her desk. "But their victims were too scared to press charges. They're protected by someone powerful. We just haven't figured out who yet." Captain Anderson leaned forward, studying the photos. Each one showed similar attacks, all targeting people of color. His jaw tightened as he recognized the pattern. This wasn't random violence, it was organized, systematic. The van had changed colors over time, but small details remained the same. These men were professionals, but they'd made one crucial mistake: they'd taken his daughter. Back at his home office, he set up a command center. Maps covered one wall, showing every reported incident involving the gang. Red pins marked confirmed attacks, blue ones showed suspected locations. Former teammates arrived throughout the night, bringing equipment and information. They moved with quiet efficiency, falling back into their military precision. Detective Chen watched them work, impressed despite herself. "This is bigger than we thought," she said, pointing to a pattern emerging on the map. "Look, all their attacks happen within these 3 zones, but their escape routes always lead here." Her finger landed on an industrial area just outside the city. One of the captain's contacts, a local shop owner, called with news. He'd seen the van earlier that night, heading toward the old warehouse district. Security cameras from nearby businesses confirmed it. The same van, same time frame. They were getting closer. But what worried the captain most was the gang's connection to someone powerful. Their previous victims had been intimidated into silence. Their complaints mysteriously disappeared from police files. Witnesses suddenly changed their stories. Someone was protecting these criminals, someone with influence. His daughter was smart, though. She'd know to stay alert, to gather information. She'd understand that her best weapon right now was her mind. The captain had taught her that from an early age: how to observe, how to remember details, how to stay calm under pressure. Now those lessons might save her life. As dawn approached, more pieces started falling into place. Traffic cameras caught the van's path through the city. Business owners came forward with security footage. Each new piece of information narrowed down the search area. The captain's team worked tirelessly, cross-referencing data, following leads, building a clearer picture of what they were facing. Detective Chen brought in FBI contacts who specialized in hate crimes. "This group's been on our radar," they confirmed. "We just haven't been able to prove the connection to their protectors in City Hall." The captain nodded grimly. Corruption in high places. That explained a lot about how this gang had operated so freely. The sun was rising over Atlanta as they gathered around the command center. Maps, photos, and documents covered every surface. The captain looked at the determined faces around him: former military, local police, FBI agents, all united in one purpose. These racist kidnappers thought they were untouchable, protected by their powerful friends. They thought taking a young black doctor would be easy. They had no idea what was coming for them. As Captain Anderson's team dug deeper into the gang's history, a disturbing pattern emerged. Ray and his crew hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. They'd been building their network for years, hiding behind legitimate businesses and powerful connections. The more the team uncovered, the clearer it became that these weren't just street thugs. They were organized, careful, and protected by people in high places. "Look at this," Detective Chen said, spreading out a stack of old police reports on the conference table. 3 years ago, a young black business owner reported being threatened by men in a white van. The case disappeared. 2 months later, his shop burned down. Insurance called it an accident. She pulled out more files, each telling a similar story. Reports filed and forgotten, evidence that vanished, witnesses who suddenly changed their stories. The captain's military contacts brought in more pieces of the puzzle. One of them, a retired intelligence officer, had been tracking money flowing through shell companies. "They're smart," he explained, pointing to a complex web of transactions on his laptop screen. "They run legitimate shipping companies as a front, but if you look closer, you'll see the pattern. Every time there's an incident, money moves through these accounts." The gang's leader, Ray, had started small. Old arrest records showed minor charges that somehow always got dropped. Over time, his operations grew bolder. He connected with other hate groups, offering them protection and resources. But it was his alliance with a corrupt city official that really changed things. Suddenly, the gang had information about police movements, advance warning of investigations, even access to city property records. They used these warehouses, another team member pointed out, marking locations on their map. All owned by different companies on paper, but if you trace the ownership back far enough, they're all connected to the same network. The warehouses created a perfect cover, legitimate business on the surface, but plenty of space to hide their real operations. What made them particularly dangerous was their patience. They didn't just attack randomly. They studied their targets, learned their routines. Previous victims reported seeing the same van drive by their homes or businesses for weeks before anything happened. The gang would learn everything about their targets, work schedules, family connections, daily routes. But this time was different. This time they'd made a crucial mistake. They hadn't studied Michelle long enough. If they had, they would have known about her father. They would have realized that taking her meant bringing the full force of military intelligence down on their operation. Detective Chen brought in a former victim who was finally ready to talk. The woman's hands shook as she described her experience, but her voice stayed strong. "They have people everywhere," she explained. "When I tried to report them, somehow they knew right away. The next day, my brother lost his job. The message was clear: stay quiet or else." The captain listened intently, noting how the gang maintained control through fear and connections. They didn't just threaten their victims, they threatened families, jobs, everything people held dear. It was a sophisticated operation that had grown right under everyone's noses, protected by corruption and silence. One of the FBI agents discovered something interesting in Ray's background. Before turning to hate crimes, he'd worked security for several powerful business owners. That's where he'd made his initial connections, learned about the dark corners of city politics. He knew exactly who could be bribed, who could be threatened, and who would look the other way. The team worked through surveillance footage from the past year, tracking the gang's movements. They operated in a careful pattern, always staying just under the radar. But now that pattern was becoming clear. They used the same routes, the same safe houses, the same methods over and over. It had made them confident, maybe too confident. "Here's something interesting," one of the captain's contacts said, pulling up some satellite images. "This warehouse they use, there's been unusual activity lately. More deliveries, more people coming and going. Something big was being planned even before they took Michelle." The pieces were starting to fit together. The gang wasn't just committing hate crimes, they were building something bigger. The kidnappings, the threats, the burned businesses, it was all part of a larger plan to control entire neighborhoods through fear. They wanted to drag out people of color, take over their properties, and replace them with their own businesses. But they hadn't counted on someone fighting back with this much resources and determination. As the captain studied the evidence wall, he could see their whole operation laid bare. Years of carefully built networks, all about to come crashing down because they grabbed the wrong person on the wrong night. "We've got them," Detective Chen said quietly, looking at their work. For the first time, we've got enough to bring down not just the gang, but their protectors too. The captain nodded. All those years of victims being silenced, of justice being denied, it was about to end. They had the evidence, they had the patterns. Now they just needed to find Michelle before the gang realized just how much trouble they were in. Inside the warehouse, Michelle sat quietly in her small room, her medical mind working overtime. Most people would focus on their fear, but she was busy observing, analyzing, planning. The gang members didn't realize that every time they opened her door, she was studying them, learning their patterns, gathering information that could help bring them down. She counted 6 different men who took turns guarding her. Each one had distinct habits, the way they walked, how they checked the room, even how they turned their keys in the lock. The leader, Ray, always visited at specific times, usually after making phone calls in the hallway. Michelle could hear bits of these conversations through the thin walls, and she was piecing together their operation bit by bit. They're getting nervous, she thought, noticing how the guards' behavior had changed over the past day. Their routines were becoming sloppy. They were arguing more, especially after phone calls. Something was happening outside these walls, and Michelle had a good feeling it had to do with her father. Her room was small but had a tiny window near the ceiling. Through it, she could see delivery trucks coming and going. She memorized their schedules, the company names painted on their sides. Every detail could be important. Her father had taught her that information was like pieces of a puzzle. Sometimes the smallest piece could be the key to everything. One guard, younger than the others, seemed less committed to their cause. Michelle noticed how he hesitated before following cruel orders, how he sometimes sneaked her extra water when no one was looking. She learned his schedule. He always worked the early morning shift, when the others were tired and less attentive. She used her medical knowledge to her advantage. When they brought food, she casually mentioned her training. "This coffee's quite bitter," she said one morning. "Reminds me of how we use similar bitter compounds in the ER for certain treatments." She watched the guard's face change. Now they were a little more careful about what they gave her, worried about what she might do with any chemicals. During her captivity, Michelle also observed the power dynamics within the group. Ray wasn't just their leader, he was connected to someone important. Whenever his phone rang with a particular ringtone, everyone jumped to attention. These calls always led to changes in their routine, suggesting orders from above. She kept track of time by counting delivery trucks and shift changes. Every piece of information was carefully stored in her memory. The warehouse itself told a story. She could smell engine oil and hear machinery, suggesting it was still partly used for legitimate business. This detail could help narrow down its location. The gang's arguments grew louder as time passed. Michelle heard mentions of police activity and unexpected attention. One guard complained about having to move their other operations. They were feeling pressure from outside, and it was making them careless. They'd started leaving doors unlocked, forgetting to check windows, missing their usual patrol times. Michelle carefully tested her room's boundaries each day. She discovered loose floorboards, memorized which parts of the floor creaked and which didn't. When guards brought food, she noted which ones put the key in their left pocket, which in their right. She learned their names by listening to their conversations, matched voices to faces even when she couldn't see them. Her medical training helped her stay healthy and alert. She knew exactly how much water to drink, how to stretch without drawing attention, how to keep her mind sharp under stress. When they thought she was sleeping, she was actually exercising quietly, keeping herself strong for whatever opportunity might come. She also picked up on the gang's bigger plans. Through fragments of conversation, she learned they weren't just targeting random people. They had a detailed system, choosing victims who could help them take over certain neighborhoods. But they were getting pushback from unexpected places, community groups standing together, businesses refusing to be intimidated. The young guard, the one who showed hints of kindness, had started lingering longer when bringing her meals. Michelle carefully built a rapport with him, noticing how he seemed troubled by the gang's activities. She never pushed too hard, but she made sure he saw her as a person, not just a target. It was a subtle game, showing strength while appearing unthreatening. What the gang didn't realize was that every hour they kept her was another hour she spent learning their weaknesses. Her father had always said knowledge was power, and right now, Michelle was becoming very powerful indeed. She heard them talking about police pressure, about feds asking questions, about something big coming down. She knew her father wouldn't rest until he found her. The gang's increasing nervousness told her the search was getting close, but Michelle wasn't just waiting to be rescued, she was preparing. Every detail she gathered could help bring down not just this group, but their entire network. All she needed was the right moment. That moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. As she lay on her small cot that night, listening to the guards argue about their next move, Michelle smiled slightly. These men thought they had all the power, but they'd made one massive mistake. They'd underestimated a black woman who'd spent her life overcoming obstacles, who'd been trained by one of the military's best, who knew exactly how to turn their own prejudices against them. The gang didn't know it yet, but their entire operation was about to unravel, and Michelle would be more than just their victim. She would be their downfall. The investigation room buzzed with energy as Captain Anderson's team closed in on their target. After days of relentless work, they'd finally pieced together the puzzle. The wall of evidence had grown into a complex web of photos, maps, and documents, all pointing to one location, an old shipping warehouse on the outskirts of town. "Look at this," Detective Chen said, pointing to fresh satellite images. "Delivery patterns have changed in the last 48 hours. They're moving something big." The captain studied the photos carefully. Years of military experience told him the gang was preparing to relocate. They were feeling the pressure. The young FBI agent who'd been tracking their phone signals burst into the room. "We've got movement," he announced, spreading new documents across the table. "Their protected phones are lighting up like Christmas trees. Something spooked them." The captain knew what this meant. Their circle of corruption was starting to crack. One of his old military teammates had been watching the warehouse district. "They've doubled their guards," he reported over the secure line. "But they're sloppy, scared, making rookie mistakes." The captain could hear the anticipation in his friend's voice. They'd seen this before. When criminals start feeling trapped, they get careless. Detective Chen brought in more news from her sources. "The corrupt city official, we've got him," she said, a hint of triumph in her voice. "He tried to access certain police files this morning, left a digital trail. We can prove he's been helping them." This was the break they needed, the link between the street-level crimes and the higher-ups who protected them. The captain's team gathered around the main table, studying the warehouse blueprints. "They've modified the building," one expert pointed out, showing thermal imaging scans. "Added internal walls here and here. But look, they left the original ventilation system. That's their weak point." It was the kind of detail that could make or break a rescue operation. As they planned, more pieces fell into place. The young guard they'd identified as their weakest link had just made a huge mistake. He'd used his personal phone inside the warehouse. "Got him," the FBI tech announced. "And better yet, he's been taking pictures, sending them to someone on the outside." The photos weren't clear, but they confirmed Michelle was alive and alert. The captain studied the layout again. Years of Special Forces operations had taught him to see what others might miss. Here, he pointed to a section of the blueprint. "They've reinforced this area. That's where they're keeping her." His team nodded. They'd seen this pattern before. Criminals always thought thick walls meant safety. The evidence from previous victims helped them understand the gang's routines. They changed guards every 6 hours. Their heaviest security was at night, but their most experienced men worked the morning shift. "They're most vulnerable during shift changes," the captain noted. "That's our window." Detective Chen brought in thermal scans from different times of day. "The temperature patterns tell us more," she explained. "This section stays cooler, probably their weapons storage. And look at the heat signatures in this corner. That's where they gather between shifts." Every piece of information helped complete the picture. The FBI had been tracking the money trail. "We've frozen their main accounts," the financial analyst reported. "They can feel the noose tightening. Their protection is falling apart." The captain watched his team work, proud of how law enforcement and military expertise had come together. Each person brought unique skills to the mission. They'd also gained unexpected help from the community. Local business owners, tired of living in fear, had begun sharing information. Security cameras from nearby buildings gave them views of the warehouse's blind spots. Delivery drivers reported unusual activities. The neighborhood was quietly fighting back. The young FBI tech made another breakthrough. Their communications are changing, he said, showing a pattern of phone signals. They're using their emergency channels more. Planning something big, probably trying to move her. The captain knew they had to act soon. When cornered animals feel trapped, they become unpredictable. His team brought in specialized equipment, thermal cameras, sound detection gear, tools that could track movement through walls. Each piece was carefully tested and prepared. They weren't just planning a raid, they were planning a precision operation that would dismantle an entire criminal network. Detective Chen's sources reported more good news. Their political protection is crumbling, she said. The evidence we gathered, it's too much. Their friends in high places are running scared. The captain allowed himself a small smile. Without their powerful protectors, the gang was just another group of criminals. The final pieces came together as they watched live feeds from surveillance positions around the warehouse. They could see the gang's growing panic, more armed guards, increased patrols, but all of it disorganized. They were making mistakes, leaving gaps in their security. The captain had seen it before. When criminals feel invincible for too long, they forget how to handle real pressure. As the team made final preparations, they received one last piece of intelligence. The young guard, the one who'd been taking photos, had just started his shift. He looked nervous, checking his phone constantly. He's ready to break, the FBI profiler noted. When we move in, he'll be the first to cooperate. The captain gathered his team for the final briefing. Every person knew their role, understood the timing, recognized the signals. They had backup teams ready, medical support standing by, and clear routes for every possible scenario. Years of experience had taught them to prepare for anything. Looking at the determined faces around him, the captain felt confident. These weren't just professionals doing a job. They were people who understood that tonight, they weren't just rescuing one person. They were bringing down an organization that had terrorized their city for too long. The sun was setting as they moved into their final positions. Soon, the gang would learn a hard lesson about underestimating people. They thought taking Michelle would show their power. Instead, it would be their last mistake. The rescue operation began at exactly 3:15 a.m. In the command center, Captain Anderson watched multiple screens showing thermal images of the warehouse. His team moved like shadows, each person knowing exactly where to go. Years of military training had prepared them for moments like this, but this time it was personal. His daughter was in there. Through night vision goggles, the team could see the gang's guards getting sloppy. They'd been awake too long, stressed by the mounting pressure of recent days. Two of them were arguing about missing patrols, while another dozed at his post. They had no idea that silent figures were already moving into position around the building. Inside her room, Michelle heard the subtle changes. The usual night sounds were different. Fewer footsteps in the hallway, longer gaps between guard checks. Her medical training had taught her to notice patterns, and something was definitely changing. She stayed alert, ready for whatever might happen. The young guard who'd been taking photos was at his post, nervously checking his phone. When the first flashbang went off at the warehouse's south entrance, he dropped his weapon immediately and raised his hands. Just as the FBI profiler had predicted, he was ready to cooperate. Multiple targets, East Corridor, crackled a voice in the captain's earpiece. On the thermal screens, he could see his team moving with precision. They'd trained for this, how to clear rooms, how to protect civilians, how to handle armed resistance. But what made this operation special was how many different agencies worked together seamlessly. Detective Chen coordinated with local police, making sure every escape route was covered. "We've got movement at the loading dock," she reported. 3 vehicles attempting to flee, but they'd prepared for this. Hidden spike strips shredded their tires before they could reach the street. The gang's leadership, realizing they were trapped, tried to delete evidence from their computers. But the FBI tech team had already hacked their network. "Everything's being backed up to our servers," the young tech agent reported with a smile. "They're just watching their cursor move while we copy their files." Inside the warehouse, the rescue team moved like a well-oiled machine. They used special cameras to check around corners, listening devices to track movement through walls. The gang members, used to being the ones in control, found themselves constantly one step behind. Michelle heard the commotion growing closer. She stayed calm, remembering her father's training. When she'd heard the distinctive pattern of boots in the hallway, 3 quick steps, pause, 2 steps, she knew it was a professional team. The gang members always walked differently, more carelessly. The scene at the command center was intense but controlled. Multiple screens showed different parts of the operation. The captain watched as years of the gang's operations crumbled in minutes. Their weapons cache was secured, their documents seized, their leaders caught trying to hide in a secret room they thought nobody knew about. "Room check, 2nd floor west," came another radio call. 5 suspects in custody. They were trying to destroy documents, but the team had expected this. They'd brought special equipment to recover shredded papers, tools to retrieve deleted files. Every piece of evidence would help bring down not just this gang, but their entire network. The young guard proved invaluable, telling them exactly where to find Michelle. But be careful, he warned. Ray rigged some doors with alarms. This information helped the team avoid traps that might have slowed them down. Sometimes, having someone on the inside made all the difference. When they finally reached Michelle's room, the rescue team found her ready and alert. She'd used her medical knowledge to stay strong, even helping them by describing the building's layout as she'd memorized it through sounds and vibrations. The captain felt a surge of pride. His daughter hadn't just survived, she'd gathered intelligence. The operation revealed more than they'd expected. Hidden rooms contained evidence of other crimes, records of corrupt deals, lists of paid-off officials, plans for future attacks. The gang had thought their political connections would protect them forever. Instead, those same connections were now being exposed. Detective Chen found something interesting in the gang's office, a wall of photos showing their targets. They were planning something big, she realized, trying to take over entire neighborhoods. But now those plans were falling apart, their network of fear and intimidation crumbling under the weight of justice. Local news crews had gathered outside, kept at a safe distance by police barriers. They filmed as suspect after suspect was led out in handcuffs, their faces no longer hidden behind masks. The community they terrorized for so long watched as their tormentors were finally brought to justice. The FBI's evidence team worked methodically, documenting everything. They found proof of corruption reaching into City Hall, the police department, even the courts. "This is bigger than we thought," one agent said, carefully bagging documents. "This will take down their whole system." When Michelle walked out of the warehouse under her own power, head held high, it sent a powerful message. She wasn't broken, wasn't defeated. If anything, she seemed stronger. The captain hugged her tightly, noting how she'd already started telling the FBI agents about everything she'd observed while in captivity. The operation had taken less than 2 hours from start to finish, but its effects would be felt for years to come. The gang's leaders, their political protectors, their corrupt allies, all of them were about to face justice. More importantly, their victims would finally have a chance to speak without fear. As the sun rose over the city, the captain watched the last police cars drive away. His daughter was safe, the gang was finished, and a message had been sent. No one was above the law, and targeting people because of their race would not be tolerated. The city could breathe a little easier now. 3 months after the warehouse raid, the city's federal courthouse was packed. Michelle sat in the front row, watching as Ray and his gang members faced justice. Her testimony had been powerful, clear, detailed, and unshakable. She'd remembered everything: conversations, routines, connections to corrupt officials. The defense lawyers couldn't find a single hole in her story. The young guard who'd helped during the raid had turned state's evidence, revealing even more about the gang's operations. His testimony exposed how deep the corruption went, naming officials who'd protected the gang for years. One by one, those powerful people were being brought down, their careers ending in disgrace. Detective Chen had been right. This case was bigger than anyone imagined. The evidence found in the warehouse led to investigations in other cities, exposing similar racist networks across the state. "It's like pulling a thread," she explained to reporters. "Once we started tugging, the whole thing began to unravel." The FBI's financial team traced the money trails, finding millions in illegal profits hidden in offshore accounts. That money was now being seized, set aside to help the gang's previous victims rebuild their lives. Business owners who'd lost everything to arson and intimidation would finally get justice and compensation. Captain Anderson watched with pride as Michelle returned to her medical career, stronger than ever. She'd turned her experience into something positive, starting a support group for survivors of hate crimes. Every Wednesday evening, people gathered to share their stories, finding strength in each other. The captain often joined these meetings, offering his military expertise to help people feel safer in their daily lives. The community began to heal and grow stronger. Where the gang had once spread fear, people now worked together. Shop owners installed connected security systems, sharing information and watching out for each other. Youth programs sprang up, teaching kids about unity and standing against hate. The neighborhood the gang had tried to destroy was now more united than ever. Michelle's hospital created a new security program, protecting staff during late shifts. Other hospitals in the area followed suit. The captain helped design these safety measures, combining his military experience with real-world needs. "We're not just treating symptoms," Michelle told her colleagues. "We're preventing the disease of hate from spreading." The young guard's cooperation led to an unexpected development. After serving a reduced sentence, he joined anti-hate programs, speaking to young people about how easy it is to fall into extremist groups and how important it is to stand up against them. His honest testimonies helped prevent others from following the same dark path. Detective Chen received a promotion for her work on the case, but she didn't stop there. She started training other officers about identifying and investigating hate crimes. "It's not enough to react after something happens," she would say. "We need to spot the signs early and stop these groups before they hurt people." The evidence room from the warehouse raid told the full story of the gang's operations. Files revealed how they'd chosen their targets, how they'd intimidated witnesses, how they'd corrupted officials. Every document helped prosecutors build stronger cases, not just against the gang, but against others like them. Local business owners who'd once lived in fear now spoke openly about their experiences. Their stories became part of training programs for law enforcement, helping officers understand how hate groups operate and how to protect vulnerable communities. The silence that had protected these criminals was finally broken. Michelle's medical colleagues were inspired by her strength. The hospital started offering free self-defense classes for staff, teaching them to be aware of their surroundings and trust their instincts. "Knowledge is power," Michelle would tell new residents. "The more you know, the safer you are." The captain turned his command center into a permanent operation, working with law enforcement to track and prevent hate crimes. His military contacts formed a network of volunteers, offering their expertise to protect vulnerable communities. They taught people about situational awareness, home security, and the importance of supporting each other. The corrupt officials exposed by the case faced their own trials. Some tried to claim they didn't know what the gang was doing, but the evidence told a different story. Emails, phone records, and bank transfers showed exactly how they'd helped cover up crimes and protect criminals. Their convictions sent a clear message: no one was above the law. Previous victims of the gang finally felt safe enough to come forward. Each new testimony strengthened the case, showing how long this group had operated and how many lives they'd affected. More importantly, each person who spoke up helped others find their voice. The chain of silence was permanently broken. Michelle's support group grew into a citywide network, connecting survivors with resources and help. Lawyers offered free legal advice, counselors provided trauma support, and business leaders created job opportunities. The community wasn't just recovering, it was growing stronger, turning pain into purpose. As the final sentences were handed down, Michelle stood outside the courthouse with her father. Reporters asked how she felt about the convictions. "Justice isn't just about punishment," she said thoughtfully. "It's about healing, about making sure this never happens to anyone else. We're stronger together than hate could ever be." The captain looked at his daughter with pride. She hadn't just survived, she'd helped transform the city's approach to hate crimes. The gang had thought they were showing power by targeting her. Instead, they'd brought about their own destruction and sparked positive change throughout the community. As they walked away from the courthouse, Michelle squeezed her father's hand. Together, they turned a terrible experience into a force for good. The gang was finished, their network destroyed, their protectors facing justice. But more importantly, the community they'd tried to terrorize was now stronger, more united, and determined to stand against hate in all its forms.